The Juan Bautista de Anza National Historic Trail covers over 1,200 miles and follows the historic route of the 1775-76 Anza expedition that began in Sonora, Mexico, and ended in what is today San Francisco, California. It travels through the states of Arizona and California and also through more than 70 tribal communities. Now, for me, this is a really interesting and special episode because in it, I interview Jorge Del Castillo, or George, as his friends and family know him, who has traveled the whole length of the trail. Now, George and I met at a commemoration of the arrival of the Anza expedition at the Presidio in San Francisco in 2018, and his enthusiasm for California history and the whole history of the Southwest and Mexico was just contagious. In this episode, we're going to talk about his pride in his Mexican-American and Californian heritage and hear his stories from his travels and his advice for people who want to take the trail like he did. He's got some great adventures, and his enthusiasm is contagious. So go ahead and listen to the episode or watch it on YouTube, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. I'm Damian Basich. Welcome to California Frontier. Jorge Del Castillo, it is great to see you and talk to you. It's been quite a while, I think, since we saw each other at the Anza Day at the Presidio in San Francisco some years back. Am I right?
That's correct. I think it was 2018.
That was a really memorable event, and maybe we'll talk about it a little bit later. But I'm really grateful to you for coming on the podcast and sharing your experiences. You have been a real supporter of the California Frontier Project and a real inspiration for people who love the history of California, the West, and Mexico, and how those are all connected. And I really love hearing about your adventures as you travel all over this the Southwest and now in Mexico as well. So once again, thanks so much.
Oh, you're welcome, Damien. It's my pleasure. We've been talking about this for many years, and I'm glad that we finally made an opportunity to do it.
Well, the reason, or at least the excuse for this conversation was to talk a little bit about your travels on the Juan Bautista de Anza National Historic Trail. And I really want to hear the stories and your experiences in doing that over quite a good period of time. But before we get to that, maybe let's talk a little bit about you and your background and what made you interested in California history of the Southwest, and how you got involved in all of this.
Well, for the most part, I didn't have any choice. I grew up in California, and I attended a LA Unified School District school, and California history was a part of the curriculum. And there were two wonderful little books, actually many wonderful little books, but two that I remember specifically was a little book on missions. It was just called Missions, and another one which was called Ranchos. And that is where I first began to study the history of California. We did a field trip to Mission San Fernando in San Fernando Valley. And it's the first time I ever saw a Spanish colonial building. My parents were both Mexicans, and even though they became American citizens, it was very important to them to teach me about Mexico. And we spent a lot of time traveling to the different early Spanish colonial sites like San Fernando Mission, Capistran, Mission San Juan Capistrano, Mission Santa Barbara, and visiting El Pueblo de la Reina de Los Angeles, where the Spanish started Los Angeles. It's now called Olvera Street. So it happened that way. We visited Mexico several times, and I got enthralled with seeing the colonial buildings, colonial ruins, Mexico City. As an adult, I attended UCLA and studied Latin American studies, and the history was a very big aspect of those studies. So that's pretty well how I got started in California history. I eventually noticed that I was visiting many Spanish colonial sites. In fact, as of today, I visited over 250 sites.
Wow.
Between Puerto Rico, Florida, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, and even in Mexico itself. So it's had some strong nurturing. I can confidently say, and I think you probably can confirm because you know my interest, that I have become a historian of Spanish colonial history as an avocation. Of course, I'm not a professional like you are, but it's definitely one of my passions.
I think that is really interesting how you combined your growing up in California and your heritage as a Mexican American without really a division. I think that a lot of us growing up in California, it's sort of a later discovery to understand this interweaving of the state of California with this greater cultural, how could you say, this greater cultural space, which is Mexico and the entire Southwest. And you also mentioned going to 250 different sites, including Puerto Rico, etc. Where do you think that came from? Was it from your parents? Was it your parents plus your own interest?
Well, I love history, and I definitely was influenced by my parents. I remember one time coming home from college during the 60s, and I had learned at UCLA that I was a Mexican American and I was a Chicano. And when I brought that home, my father got about as angry as I've ever seen him get with me. He says, "You are not a Chicano. Do you know what that word means? It comes from the word chicanery, and we're not chicanerous." And we call ourselves American Mexicans. You are an American first, but you be proud of your Mexican heritage. And we did get a chance to visit Mexico about every 5 to 6 years. My parents' family lived there, and we would go visit them there. But as I matured, that interest grew with me, and I enjoyed reading a lot about that history, and I loved visiting the sites, the forts in Puerto Rico, San Agustin, the first American city in Florida. It still is there. Wonderful place to visit. The missions along the San Antonio River, including the Alamo. When we moved to Arizona, I was really surprised to see how much Spanish colonial history was here. In particular, the Juan Bautista de Anza trail crossed through most of southern Arizona. So it was natural, and it is surprising, as you noted, how easily it blended from my childhood studies in the school system through what my parents taught me and how they raised me, right through to my adulthood. And right now, I'm what they call here in Mexico, they call seniors tercer edad, the third age.
That's right. That's right. And you live in Mexico currently.
Yeah, that's really interesting too. I was prompted by my wife. She's a lot younger than me, and she didn't like saying goodbye to me in bed as she went off to work after I retired. So she was determined to figure out a way that she could retire early and we could live off of my pensions. And she identified this town in Mexico, very close to Guadalajara, Mexico, on the shores of the largest lake in Mexico called Chapala. And we moved here 5 years ago. We purchased our home here 4 years ago, and we've just been loving it.
I think a lot of Americans have retired in Mexico, or I have an uncle, for example, who is always down visiting in San Miguel de Allende, for example, but it seems to be a growing movement.
Yes, definitely. This community here is very popular, and many, probably the majority of Mexicans are bilingual English. So it makes it easy for Americans to come here. And as you probably know, the Mexican people can't be any friendlier. They are so open, and they especially respect and honor their senior citizens. And they try hard in any occasion to take care of us. So it's a perfect fit. And the cost is approximately 1/3 of what it costs us to live in the United States.
Wow.
It is starting to go up a little bit. The Americans here, we laugh and we tease the Mexicans about the gringo tax. Many of the Americans come here and they flash their money and they spend it very easily. So the Mexicans figured, hey, if we can make 100 pesos on an item instead of 50, because these guys will pay for it, let's charge 100 pesos. And that difference between what the Mexicans pay and what the Americans pay is referred to as the gringo tax.
I like that. The old law of supply and demand at its best.
Exactly. Oh, Mexicans are remarkable entrepreneurs. It's just amazing how anybody of any class and any level of education, if they have an opportunity, will start a business.
That's excellent. That's wonderful. That I think that's one of the things that probably has been important as such a contribution of Mexican immigrants and Mexican Americans is this entrepreneurial spirit that they have. And so you see that it's deeply rooted.
We just noticed, I just got a report. I subscribe to a local Mexican newspaper that's in English. Very good. They bring together articles from all the major Mexican newspapers and even from around the world like Forbes and New York Times. And they just announced this week that last year, Mexico surpassed China as the largest, I'm not sure if it's importer or exporter, but a major business partner with the United States.
Wow, that doesn't surprise me. That's fascinating. That's an interesting piece of information, and it's also an important augury for the future.
Yes, especially being so close to the United States, so convenient for American businesses to use the Mexican labor. Mexican unemployment is at lowest levels right now, about 6%.
Wow. So let's talk.
Which is good for illegal immigrants trying to cross the border because they can find jobs here.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Well, let's talk about these adventures of yours all along the Anza Trail. Let's begin by do you want to tell us a little bit about what the trail is and once again why you got interested in doing it and traveling it?
Certainly. The trail is something that a Spanish soldier was commissioned to identify so that the Spanish could go across land from Mexico to Northern California. Up until the time that the trail was identified, the only way to get to Northern California was by ocean. And as you and I have discussed before, one of the major ports in Mexico was San Blas, Acapulco, and then they were to try to make it all the way to Monterrey. But the king and his court became very concerned because the Russians were colonizing Northern California, and they were coming down into encroaching the Spanish Empire. And so were the English. The pirate Sir Francis Drake had landed in Northern California. And so they wanted to protect their territory. So they commissioned Juan Bautista de Anza, who was already a proven soldier and leader. He was the commandant of the Presidio in Tubac, and his father was a soldier as well. And he grew up learning about how to live in the desert, how to get along with Native American people, the Apaches. And so he was commissioned. He started in Mexico City and started moving north through El Fuerte. There was a Presidio there. And that's where he began to recruit people, soldiers and colonists, and continued moving up to El Fuerte. I think I just mentioned that. Really interesting things that you asked me in our previous discussions in preparation for this. What are some of the things that I really enjoyed? In El Fuerte, I found an hacienda that is said to be the place where El Zorro was born. Don Diego de la Vega was part of a very rich family who had an hacienda there. Eventually, they moved to Los Angeles, and that's where he started his Robin Hood history on stealing from the rich Spaniards and giving it to the poor Spaniards. But anyway, step back a little bit. When he received the commission to find this trail or discover this trail, he left in 1775 with only soldiers and some priests, because he wanted to determine where would be the possible way to get through northern Mexico, southern Arizona, southern California, and make it all the way initially only to Monterrey. There was a Presidio in Monterrey and a mission there already, before he would try to bring civilians. His second trip was the next year. He returned and he started recruiting civilians, and he eventually recruited about 200 civilians with many priests and many soldiers. And they moved up from El Fuerte to Mission Tumacacori, the Presidio Tubac. That he did determine, of course, that in order to survive, they were going to need water. So they followed the rivers as much as they could. The Yaqui River in northern Mexico, the Santa Cruz River through southern Arizona, up to the Gila River. And then they followed the Gila River through southern Arizona over to the Colorado River. In order to get across the California desert, they had to make their own water wells. And this is one of the remarkable things that he did, that he learned from living in northern Mexico. He sent his soldiers, about a half a dozen of them, ahead of him, and they dug wells in the desert sand early enough so that the water from the water table would seep up and fill the well. Because he had hundreds of head of cattle and hundreds of horses, besides the people that he needed to provide water for. One of the places they stopped was an actual natural well that the Native Americans were using, and these things helped him to get across the Mojave Desert in the Sonoran Desert. Well, I kind of been rambling on. I think I answered your question, but are there other questions? Yeah. Oh, it was about the trail. Yeah. He had with him a very extremely well-educated and talented Franciscan monk, Pedro Font. And Father Font recorded every detail down to the campfires where they sang fandangos And the prayers, the actual prayers that they gave every day along the way. But to me, the most fascinating thing was what kind of a scientist he was. He recorded as much as he could about the wildlife, the plants, and he was a surveyor. He could actually, using the stars, he could identify the latitudes and longitudes of every campsite. And he recorded all of this in his journal. Juan Bautista de Anza also had a journal, and the two journals were compared by, as far as I know, one of the first people was a college student working on his doctorate degree, Greg Smestad. You know Greg.
Greg
and he
was my second guest on the podcast.
I believe that. He is one of the heirs of the original members of the colonists that came with Juan Bautista de Anza. And he wrote for his, I think, doctor's thesis, a travel guide on how to follow the trail on the United States side. And it's really detailed, and I use that to help me as I tried to follow the trail. He was also guided by another historian named Phil Valdez. He was dedicated to the trail, and he actually used fonts, latitude, longitude bearings to identify every campsite. And with that information and Greg's information, the trail was very clearly identified. The National Park System determined that this was a treasure, a national treasure. And I think they made this the very first National Historic Trail. Many have followed since, but the park system really helped me because they put up signs along the highway that said that you're on the trail. This is where you need to turn whichever direction, right, left, or keep going straight. And I use those signs a lot, plus Greg's guide with the help of Phil. And I read and took with me Pedro Font's journal. It's quite a big book. I'll share it with you. Of course, with all the details that it has. Oh, he was also a cartographer. He made wonderful maps.
And you know what? I'm going to put a link so that people can find that journal and buy it.
I definitely will. Yeah. If they're interested, it's worth it. And between Greg's manual and that, anybody could do it. But the park system has created on their website a link to the whole trail with maps, identifying all of the stops, all of the campsites. To get to San Francisco Bay, the Anza party took about 95 campsites, but he continued to go around the bay to the east side and north. So by the time he was finished exploring the area, there was over 100 sites that they stopped at. Let's see. It's, well, I think I covered everything that I wanted to cover.
Well, how did you get, well, first of all, how did you start this, quest, and how long did it take you?
Well, because of my interest in the Spanish colonial history, I did identify something that I thought would be really interesting. In Tubac at the Presidio, they were celebrating Anza coming through there. And they had something called the Anza Days. At that time, I had no idea who he was or what it was, but I went. And that's when I saw a portrayal of Juan Bautista de Anza with Moraga and his lieutenants and Pedro Font coming into the area. They actually marched in, all dressed in costume. You saw the same man at the Presidio at the anniversary that we attended.
Yeah, I remember very well. And I have pictures of both of them on the website with Greg dressed as Father Font.
And you as Father Font.
I put any of those pictures up yet. I'll have to.
So there I identified the Anza Society, and I immediately joined that, and I attended the very next annual convention they had that happened to be in Alamos, which is one of the towns that De Anza recruited citizens from as he came north. In fact, when we were there in Alamos, they showed me the building, where the Spanish headquarters were. It's now currently a home, but the owner of the home allowed us to go in, and I could see the stables where Anza would have kept his horses, the barns. That was one of the big highlights of following the trail, was going to Alamos. It's a beautiful town. It's what they call a pueblo mágico. And it's not very far from the border of the United States. I encourage anybody to go there.
So that would be in the state of Sonora?
Yes. Yes, it would be. And there are many of the original Father Kino missions open through the state of Sonora. So if anybody wants to explore that.
Kino was the great Jesuit missionary who traveled all over the Southwest.
Yes. Yeah. And one of the big differences between the Franciscan and the Jesuits is the Jesuits could ride horses. They were mounted on horses, and Franciscans had to walk. So there, yeah. But anyway, that turned me on to it. I'm not sure it was the bookstore at the mission or the bookstore at the fort, the Presidio, I found Greg's manual. And of course, I bought that right up, and I was so thrilled to see the contents of it. And after Alamos, I started to explore the trail. It took about 2.5 years to complete the trail from Alamos to the San Francisco Bay, but we broke it up into 7 separate trips.
And you're doing this by motor vehicle. You're not walking the trail.
Correct. Yeah, we followed those signs that the park system had put on the roads. We used Greg's manual and some notes that I took from Father Font, and in total, calculating the time that I spent on the road over those 2.5 years, it actually took about 2 weeks.
Okay.
So if somebody had the fortitude and the resolve, they could start in Nogales, Mexico, and come up along the Santa Cruz River, past the Presidio and the Mission, and go right around through Arizona and up in 2 weeks.
Now, are there a lot of people doing this trail? Or do you know, have you met others?
I never did find any other people, but at the anniversary that you and I attended, there were certainly, about 200 people there at the luncheon. And I would imagine that many of them have identified the trail and explored some of it. The nice thing is you can break it up, and you don't need to do it in order. One of my favorite parts was hiking along the actual trail in the Malibu Park Reserve. It's a walkable natural trail, and those signs are actually on the trail.
So Malibu,
they don't look like big ones you see on the street.
Malibu there in Southern California coast near Los Angeles.
Right, just above Woodland Hills. And I don't recall exactly what it was, but we hiked the trail up to a stone building. Wasn't Spanish. It might have been built by a farmer that was in that area, but that's used as a outpost. You can get meals there. You can get drinks there, and then you can hike back to the parking lot. It's a nice walk. There are also many beautiful walks around the missions. He visited, as he went through there, Father Sarah had been through the area ahead of him on foot and started many missions. Most of them don't look like they do today. Like the one that he saw probably in San Gabriel was more of an adobe building than the beautiful mission that exists there now. But yeah, I started with Anza days. I eventually, through the Anza Society, met the ranger, the park ranger that's responsible for the trail. And she's encouraged me a lot. In fact, she's looking forward to hearing our interview here. Her name is Naomi Torres.
Yes, I met Naomi a number of times.
Yeah, she's still working for them on the trail. So I was really happy to learn that. So that's pretty well how I got started, and that's how I went along. My poor wife, she's such a good supporter of me. And if she were here, she'd be the first to tell you. She spent one Christmas at the Yuma crossing in Yuma.
Merry Christmas in Yuma.
Yeah. But she would go wherever we were required to go. One of the things that I identified to share with you in a question that you were planning to ask, but I think it's appropriate now, was my favorite story. We were driving through Hemet, following the signs on the road, and we turned off on a side road because it said to turn right there. And there weren't any more signs. We drove along for a mile, maybe 2 miles along that road, and we came to a road called Bautista Canyon Road.
Okay.
And I go, well, I guess we're on the right trail here, or part of the trail. Let's follow this. So we started driving through that, and we went through some orange orchards. It became a dirt farm road, but we kept on going. And eventually we came to a creek crossing, and every stone in the creek was covered with a white substance. I would imagine it was some sort of algae that had dried up. But I remembered reading in Font's journal, we came to a creek where all the stones were white.
Wow.
I said, this has got to be it. We must be to the creek that Font crossed. So I said, let's pull over here. I tried to document everything in photographs. Let me get a few pictures. So I walked over to the creek. It came down out of a canyon, which I've learned since it was Bautista Canyon. As I was walking back to the car, I noticed on the cliff behind the parking lot a bronze plaque. And I said, what's this right out here in the middle of nowhere? I went up and I looked at the plaque. Anza Trail, 1774, 1776.
You were right on it.
We were on the trail, and it was identified with this bronze plaque. We drove up the canyon a little ways just to see what it would have been like for him to come down from the canyon. He came through the canyon on his way after crossing the desert, coming through the Sierra Madre Mountains, through a town that's even there now called Anza, through Anza Borrego Desert. Of course, all those places weren't named these things when he came through, but he came down through the canyon to get to the San Gabriel Valley because he was trying to get to San Gabriel Mission. But I was real excited, and that just shows you what a good supporter my wife was.
Yeah, I think we have to give lots of credit to our wives for supporting us on these adventures and hobbies and avocations.
It's fun that you called it that because you're a professional historian and you're a professor of history. But yeah, if you love history, it's like a hobby.
It is, because the way I feel about it, especially if you live in a place where you can visit historical sites, it's like putting on those, the virtual or augmented reality glasses where you're seeing the reality in front of you, but then you're also seeing more than everybody else is seeing. And you mentioned the names of these places like Anza Canyon, etc. The names start to have a meaning, and you understand that they're not there by accident, and that they're actually marking places where events occurred, where people did something. So yeah, I completely agree. It just makes life more dense and more rich.
Definitely. And it's really important to notice those Spanish names because they were put there by Spaniards that had explored and called their own the New World, New Spain in the 1500s, explored it through the 1600s. Anza came through in the mid 1700s. In fact, 1776 rings a bell. But all of that was Spain until the Mexican-American War. And unfortunately, that war took more than half of the new Spain of Mexico. And many people don't know that. They do see the Spanish names, but that's the reason for the Spanish names, because until 1848, hundreds of years later, it was Spanish. Quick aside, I read a book called Mexico, So Far from God, So Near to the United States. It was written by one of President Eisenhower's children, John Eisenhower. I guess he became a historian. And that quote is from, at the time, I think he was only a captain or a lieutenant colonel, U.S. Grant. And he called this war the most evil war that ever occurred in history.
Wow.
Yeah. So there are a lot of Mexicans who are still angry about that. In the peace treaty, all Mexican Americans had the right to speak Spanish and retain their culture, which has become a political issue today. But it does go back to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in the 1848. So yeah, it's a great history. It's something obviously I'm proud of, and it's something that you love too.
Absolutely. And when you describe, the things that, for example, that they did on the trail, like digging wells to have them ready for when they pass by later, you think of that famous quote or that famous piece of advice, dig your well beforehand, right? You see where
Exactly.
it's not a joke. It comes from actual hard learned experience, right? Or the fact that Father Font was a geographer and could guide on find the latitude and longitude based on following the stars. The skills that people had in the past that we don't even realize we've lost is something that when you understand it, it just gives you an admiration for the type of grit and the type of practical intelligence that many people had a couple of hundred years ago.
Yes. And in fact, before Font, there was another Franciscan monk who had walked similar ways and kept very accurate notes as well that De Anza used for identifying his trail initially. Now that they conquered the trail, something that I've identified that I'd like to learn more about are the mission industries, because the missions had the industries and the farms that supported the presidios.
Right.
And they raised the cattle. They cultivated the hides and the tallow for candles, the products. They grew the first grapes here, which were necessary for communion for the church. Yeah, it's like you said, it's very remarkable, the level of technology. But it was there in Spain, and Spain was one of the leaders in the 16th, 17th century, one of the most developed, had some of the best universities. So there was a lot to bring over. In fact, that exchange across the Atlantic and then later across the Pacific to the Philippines is called the Columbian Exchange.
That's right.
Because goods and products went both ways. Like the oranges came from China. The chilies went from Mexico.
And
It's a great hit.
Potatoes from Peru, all sorts of things. You're right.
Yes. Yeah, and tomatoes and cocoa, chocolate. We wouldn't have chocolate, Swiss chocolate, if it wasn't for the Mexican chocolate.
That's right. And when you talk about the universities, right? There were universities founded in Latin America in the 1550s, right? Already you had the University of San Marcos in Peru, and so this culture that the Spanish brought north into California was already a well-established culture that not only came from Spain, but then rooted itself in Latin America. And so it brought also a sort of hybrid Spanish, Mexican, Latin American culture with it, right?
Exactly.
They're eating tortillas and nopales and, chocolate, right? One of the most, the missionaries are talking about how they love chocolate, right? These are all things that are brought through, they're brought by the Spanish, let's say, who had been here for 300 years. So Spanish Mexican culture that comes up into Alta California.
Right. And to put that 300-year period in a context, what was they accomplished? The United States is only 250 years old.
Right.
Our whole history that we relate to and that we think about is a less time than the Spanish ruled the Americas.
That's right.
And you're absolutely right. You hit it on the head, Damien. The Spaniards did cross-pollinate the cultures. They were very open-minded, and they loved to exchange ideas, even from the Native Americans. Many of the missionaries were built by Native Americans, missions. Probably all of them, one way or another, were built by Native Americans. And an interesting thing, one of the things that I love to look for when I go into a mission, they hid in the murals and in the paintings and in the art that they put in these missions, pieces of their own culture.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and that's how culture.
St. Francis of Assisi is portrayed in Europe in the churches with wings. That first occurred in a Native American mural. They're the ones who put the wings on St. Francis.
Wow, I did not know that. That's fascinating. But that's how cultures grow, is they combine, they take in elements of the other cultures that they encounter, and then you have something new and even more fascinating, more beautiful than existed prior. So,
like the United States.
Exactly.
We're a melting pot.
Exactly, right. I'm the result of 3 or 4 different cultures that came together, right, in the United States. And
Passage, is that Eastern European?
Right. It's today it's Croatia, right? And so when my grandfather came, he actually was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So I think he considers himself Austrian. That's my father's father. But they came from a part of Croatia that had been a Greek colony and later a Roman colony, and then the Venetians and the Austrians. So they had been colonized multiple times over and had taken in all sorts of different influences. So my grandmother's cooking on my father's side was very Italian, right? So yeah, it was a result of this big mix. And then, of course, on my mother's side, we're Portuguese and Irish and French and a lot of different things.
Wow, we'll have to talk more about that because I have similar roots.
Yeah, we're Americans, exactly, and Californians.
Yes, we are.
Right? A lot of these were historical communities, and I'm going on a tangent here, but I mean, these were communities that settled in California, right? The Croatians, the Portuguese, of course, the Irish. They were all historical communities that migrated and settled in California and then mixed.
Yep.
So I want to respect your time. Let's finish off with one last question. What would you recommend other people do the trail or do portions of it? And what kind of preparation might you advise people to undertake?
Definitely, I would recommend it for anybody, because if you don't like history and you don't know California history, taking some of the parts of it along with the California missions in the Presidio, like in Santa Barbara, will open your eyes. And you can't help but get a little bit passionate about the history and identifying more. So yeah, I definitely recommend that they do that. I would suggest that if you do it, take a little bit at a time. You could do the whole thing in 2 weeks, but it's nice to explore as you move along. As I came up along the California coast, it was great to see the sand dunes near Pismo, to see the low chaparral growth as we drove through the mountains of California. The towns that grew up around the different missions, they have great restaurants, a lot of good museums. So I would recommend that you take your time and identify places like I did there in Malibu Park where you can walk. Because there's nothing like getting the feel for what it was like than to walk through it. And they came through, the Anza party came through at a really beautiful time of the year, spring. So California, this looks usually dry and golden, was very green and beautiful, lots of wildflowers. And I would encourage people to do it at that time, in the spring. One of the things that I have learned to appreciate, and I think you'll identify with this, is to stop and take a seat in these ruins and in these missions and begin to feel the people that were there before. I love feeling the colonists and the Indians, and it may be imaginary, but I believe it's spiritual. I think the people that lived there left more than their dead bodies and what they constructed. And so I encourage people to take your time, stop and feel what's going on around you, even if it's just the nature, the animals that you'll see. It's wonderful. But the thing that I would recommend more than anything, I got the book, and I will post that, and I'll also post a link to Greg's journal. But the National Park System, go on their website, see what Naomi and her associates have developed, much more now than when I came along through it. It highlights special places along the way, has a great map. It even has driving directions. So the National Historic Trail, San Juan Bautista National Historic Trail, on the National Park System website. One thing that I don't want to neglect to share with you, Damien, is how following the trail affected me personally. As I indicated earlier in the interview, it ignited the passion in me to explore the history. And I started some visits before, but now I've hit 250 sites because of that passion. And it allowed me to accomplish something that I think is very important with my life. I've documented this in pictures, and the pictures tell the story. But being in the tercera edad, you start thinking about what you can leave behind. And this podcast is very important for me. I'm very grateful, Damien, that you've allowed me to record this. It's something that my children want to hear. My grandchildren will want to hear. Thank you.
Well, it's a great, great honor for me. And that means a lot to me because I also care about my legacy. And I know that this podcast, because I've heard it from people, is a service to many people who enjoy hearing about these stories, who enjoy learning about the history of California and living these adventures through the people who do them. So I appreciate your willingness to share your story and to get on and to talk in a very vulnerable way about your experience. And I think everybody listening does too. So I really am grateful for the time you took and for all the friendship that we've shared over these years, which I'm sure will continue on. So.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. And thank you for always having an open ear to the things that I like to share with you.
Yep. Kindred spirits.
Yes, we do. Definitely. Well, thank you again.
Thank you.
And God bless, Damien.
Likewise. It's been great talking to you. This is the California Frontier Show. If you would like to know more about the California Frontier Project, visit californiafrontier.net. If you would like to support the show, scroll down in the show notes and click Support the Show. Then be sure to tell all your friends about the podcast. If you would like to connect with me, the host, send me an email at damien@californiafrontier.net.